It was a warm summer afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, when David and Mei Lin sat behind the counter of their dry cleaning business, a modest shop they had run for nearly a decade. Their life was quiet, routine, and comfortable, built on hard work and the respect of their local customers. They had a loyal clientele, people who trusted them with their most precious garments. That all changed when Matthew Sullivan walked through their door one fateful afternoon, carrying something in his arms with the care one might reserve for a newborn child. It was a beautiful white wedding dress. The satin shimmered under the soft light of the shop, intricate lace patterns crawling delicately over the bodice and flowing down into the layered train. It was obvious the dress had been made with love, custom-made to fulfill the dreams of a soon-to-be bride. "My fiancée, Sarah, wore this to try it on at home," Matthew explained, his voice shaky, his eyes reflecting a subtle panic. "She, accidentally spilled some wine on it. Our wedding's in 2 weeks. Can you clean it? Please?" Mei Lin smiled warmly and nodded. "Of course, we can take care of it. It'll be as good as new." As they handed over the claim ticket, Matthew looked as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He thanked them profusely, then left, the bell on the door tinkling as it shut behind him. That night, Sarah could barely contain her excitement. They had spent months planning the perfect wedding, a day that was meant to celebrate their love. She had been so anxious to wear the dress, dreaming of how she would look walking down the aisle in it. But fate had other plans. On their way home from an evening out, just 2 weeks before the wedding, the couple's car was struck by an oncoming vehicle. Matthew survived the crash, bruised but alive. Sarah, however, was not so lucky. The wedding dress, freshly cleaned and restored to its pristine condition, sat at the dry cleaner, waiting. But Sarah would never wear it. A month passed. The dress remained unclaimed at David and Mei Lin's shop. Every day, the couple noticed the haunting presence of the wedding gown in the back, hanging there, waiting for someone who would never come. They called Matthew repeatedly, leaving messages that went unanswered. His voice had long faded from their memories, replaced with the eerie silence of unclaimed garments. Mei Lin grew more uneasy with each passing day. There was something about that dress, an energy that clung to it, like the scent of death that lingers after something has gone terribly wrong. David noticed it too but tried to dismiss the feeling. They were business owners, after all. They couldn't let a beautiful, expensive dress go to waste. "We'll put it online," David finally suggested one evening. "Someone else can have it. It's too valuable to just leave here." Despite her reluctance, Mei Lin agreed. That night, they posted the dress on a second-hand wedding website. It wasn't long before they received messages of interest. But something strange happened every time someone tried to purchase it. Credit cards mysteriously declined, accounts froze, or buyers backed out at the last minute. Each potential sale was met with an obstacle, and soon enough, nobody was interested anymore. That same night, the hauntings began. It started with small things, the shop lights flickering after hours, cold drafts that swept through the room despite the humid summer air. But it quickly escalated. Mei Lin woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft sobbing. At first, she thought it was a bad dream. But when she turned to her husband, she saw that he was awake too, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The sobbing grew louder, echoing through their small apartment above the dry cleaner. It wasn't just the sound of someone crying, it was a heart-wrenching, mournful wail, the kind of sorrow that burrows deep into your bones. Mei Lin bolted upright, her heart racing. The next morning, they went downstairs to open the shop and found it in complete disarray. Hangers were strewn across the floor, garments knocked from their racks, and the wedding dress was no longer where they had left it. Instead, it was hanging in the center of the room, its once white fabric stained with dark, wet streaks that resembled blood. David recoiled at the sight, stumbling backward, his mind racing. How could this have happened? They had locked the doors the night before. For days, they tried to carry on as usual, but every night brought more terror. The sobbing grew louder, accompanied by whispers and the sensation of icy fingers trailing down their backs as they slept. Mei Lin began to fall ill, growing weaker with each passing day. Her skin turned a sickly pale, and dark circles formed under her eyes as if something was draining her life away. David fared no better. He became plagued by horrific nightmares, dreams of a woman in a blood-stained wedding dress, her face obscured by a veil, standing at the foot of his bed. He would wake up drenched in sweat, only to find the sensation of a cold hand still lingering on his arm. It was clear that something was terribly wrong, and it all centered around that dress. One night, as Mei Lin lay in bed, too weak to even move, she whispered to David, "We have to get rid of it. The dress, it's cursed." Desperate, David tried to remove the online listing, but no matter what he did, the website wouldn't allow it. Every time he attempted to delete the post, an error message popped up. It was as if something was stopping him. Then came the final straw. One evening, as David prepared to close the shop, the front door flew open with a violent force, sending a gust of wind through the store. There, in the middle of the room, stood a figure. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil, her body draped in a tattered wedding dress. Blood dripped from the hem, pooling onto the floor. David couldn't breathe. His body was frozen in place as the figure slowly raised her head. For the first time, he saw her face, pale, gaunt, her eyes hollow, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed endless. "Why did you try to sell my dress?" Her voice was a rasp, barely more than a whisper, but it echoed in the room like thunder. David collapsed to his knees, begging, pleading for forgiveness, but the spirit's gaze never wavered. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating, and as the woman took a step toward him, David felt his chest tighten as though invisible hands were squeezing the life out of him. He barely made it upstairs to Mei Lin, gasping for breath, his face white as a sheet. "We have to remove the listing, now," he choked. It took everything they had, but with trembling hands, David finally managed to delete the online post. The moment it was gone, the air around them seemed to shift. The oppressive weight lifted, and the shop grew quiet. For the first time in weeks, the sobbing ceased. But they never opened the dry cleaner again. Mei Lin's health never fully recovered, and David couldn't bear to go back. The shop remained closed, a ghostly reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. As for the wedding dress, it was never found. Some say it's still out there, waiting for someone to claim it, its cursed fabric stained with the sorrow of a bride who never got to wear it on her wedding day.